Sam Lee Jennings spent his early years on a modest farm just outside Meridian, Mississippi. He was known for being quiet and somewhat invisible during school, never drawing attention to himself. While other students prepared for college, Sam Lee enrolled in building trades classes, opting for a practical path that matched his hands-on lifestyle. When he wasn't in class, he assisted his father with various odd jobs and chores on their small farm, learning the value of hard work from an early age. For leisure, Sam Lee embraced the outdoors, hunting and fishing whenever he could. With no car and limited finances, dating and social outings were not part of his life, but he accepted his circumstances without complaint, determined to make the best of them. Upon graduating from high school, Sam Lee chose to enlist in the army. His father had served in the military when he was younger, lured in by the enticing promises of a recruiter who spoke of valuable training opportunities. However, reality fell short of those promises, and Sam Lee's father ended up spending 4 long years in the infantry, gaining none of the specialised training he had expected. Remembering his father's stories, Sam Lee made sure to get a written guarantee of training and a clear occupational specialty in his enlistment contract. He committed to a 4-year term as a fixed-wing engine mechanic, believing it would set him on a path to a stable career. In the army, Sam Lee's personality remained consistent, reliable but unremarkable. He completed basic training and graduated in the middle of his class, neither excelling nor struggling. From there, he was stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama, to undergo training as an aviation mechanic. Sam Lee quickly established himself as a solid and dependable worker, ranking in the upper half of the 3rd quartile of his class. The training was rigorous, lasting over a year in classrooms and workshops where he mastered the mechanics of fixed-wing aircraft engines. When the initial training phase was over, he began on-the-job training, OJT, shadowing an experienced mechanic and working under strict supervision. Every task was closely monitored to ensure quality and precision. One morning, Sam Lee, now a private first class, PFC, was summoned to the company commander's offices. Captain Burton, a stern man known for his no-nonsense attitude, greeted him with a blunt statement. "Private Jennings, the Army's projections for aircraft engine mechanics have changed. We don't need as many as we thought. I'm offering you a chance to transfer to a wheeled vehicle mechanic program. Sign here." Sam Lee may have looked unassuming, but he was far from naive. He replied, "I'd like to think about it, sir." Captain Burton's expression hardened. "What's there to think about, Private? Sign the paper." Sam Lee's mind raced. He knew that if transferring him was as simple as the captain implied, it would have already been done without his consent. Realising something was off, he said, "Sir, I'd like to request permission to speak with a JAG officer." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Don't stir up trouble, PFC, Jennings." But when Sam Lee stood his ground, Captain Burton added grudgingly, "Fine. You can see a JAG officer, but it's a waste of time. I'm trying to keep you in a mechanic's role." Sam Lee remained silent, and the captain dismissed him with a wave. That same day, Sam Lee set up an appointment with Captain Fred Guy, an experienced JAG officer who had a reputation for integrity. Captain Guy was a reserve officer on active duty and highly respected in the legal office. He had even been promoted from the top 5% of candidates, but planned to leave the army soon due to his wife's dislike of military life. Captain Guy was familiar with cases like Sam Lee's. The army had been putting pressure on commanders to persuade soldiers to waive their enlistment guarantees. After reviewing Sam Lee's enlistment contract, Captain Guy asked, "Have you completed your training satisfactorily?" "Yes, sir. I've finished all the school training and am currently under OJT supervision," Sam Lee replied. Captain Guy nodded. "What's your preference, then?" "I don't want to be downgraded to an assistant wheeled mechanic's helper. If I can't continue as an aviation engine mechanic, I'd rather be discharged." "My CO really pushed hard for me to sign that transfer request," Sam Lee said earnestly. "You're smart not to sign. If you had, you'd be locked into a 4-year term. By refusing, you might be reassigned to a training company. and separated at the 2-year mark. Captain Guy explained, "It's in the fine print. I'll submit a request on your behalf and speak to your CO. It's best if you keep this to yourself. No need to antagonise your CO further." Sam Lee nodded. "Only my buddy, PFC Harold Starr, knows I came here." Captain Guy leaned back. "Good, let's keep it that way." Sam Lee spent the next 7 months working in the motor pool at Fort Polk, Louisiana, before he was officially released from active duty. Once back in Meridian, Sam Lee considered finishing an FAA mechanics certification at the local community college, but ultimately decided to look for immediate work. After 2 months of job hunting, he found that truck driving was the only work readily available. On the advice of the unemployment office, he applied for a job at the post office. His veteran's preference gave him an edge, and he soon secured a position as a letter carrier, a job he preferred over indoor sorting or maintenance work. Sam Lee's first mail route was grueling. It covered a public housing project and 6 surrounding blocks known for their high crime rates and hostility. The job was demanding and often dangerous, but Sam Lee persevered, proving his resilience once again. After 3 years on that challenging route, an opportunity arose to transfer to a route in a more pleasant part of town. The new route was lined with older, well-kept homes, and the residents were known to be friendly. The job required a lot of walking, as each house had door service, and carriers were not allowed to cut across lawns. Sam Lee's seniority allowed him to claim the new route, and a seasoned training officer named Craig Bowman offered him some advice. "Get to know the folks on your route. They'll become like family. I loved mine until I had to give it up after my heart attack." Taking Craig's words to heart, Sam Lee introduced himself to each resident. "I'm your new letter carrier. Let me know if there's anything you need." He quickly earned the trust of the community, holding mail when residents were away, paying for postage-due letters up front, and leaving envelopes for reimbursement. His patrons even left money for stamps or uncertain postage. Sam Lee took pride in taking care of them, and in turn, they came to appreciate and respect him. Everyone on Sam Lee's new route was friendly, and as Craig had predicted, the Christmas season brought in plenty of gifts from grateful residents. Sam Lee took extra care with his work, rearranging his route to check in on 3 widows early each morning, ensuring they were well. The only residents who didn't require as much attention were the few divorcees who were always busy with work. In his 2nd year delivering mail on this route, a new couple moved in, a doctor and his wife Annette. They bought and remodelled one of the grand, older homes that sat beneath the canopy of ancient oaks. Annette was, without question, the most stunning woman Sam Lee had ever seen. He found himself captivated by the way she carried herself and looked forward to any excuse to see her, especially when he delivered parcel post packages. One afternoon, Sam Lee brought a package to Annette that required her signature. She invited him inside while she checked the contents of the box. Smiling, she asked, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" Sam Lee hesitated for a moment before replying, "I'd love a glass of water if you'll join me." They sat at the kitchen table, and conversation flowed naturally. "Do you mind if I call you Sammy? It's one of my favourite names," she said, her smile lighting up the room. "Sammy's fine," he replied, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "Tell me about yourself, Sammy," she prompted, genuinely curious. "There's not much to tell," Sammy said modestly. "I grew up just outside town on a small farm, helping my dad with handyman work. After high school, I joined the army. When I got out, I landed a job at the post office. I've been there for 5 years now, and this is my 3rd year on this route. What about you? Would you mind sharing your story?" Annette's expression softened as she spoke. "I was born and raised in Selma, Tennessee. My parents are retired now. I went to nursing school at UT Memphis, which is where I met my husband. We got married 3 years ago, and after he completed his residency, we moved to Meridian. He's originally from Martin, Tennessee. Not the most thrilling story, I'm afraid." Sammy glanced at the clock and stood up. "I should get back to work. Thank you for the water and the chat." "I enjoyed it too," Annette said warmly. "Maybe we can do this again sometime." Sammy nodded, his heart racing as he stepped out the door. Over the next few weeks, he continued delivering packages to Annette's house, each time exchanging brief, friendly words. He subtly adjusted his route to make sure her house fell right at his afternoon break. Sammy, who always packed his lunch, started eating it in the cul-de-sac where Annette lived. One day, as he dropped off another package, she greeted him with a knowing smile. "Is that you I see having lunch at the end of the street?" she asked. Sammy chuckled, slightly embarrassed. "Yes, I've been doing that since I started on this route. I watched as they remodeled your house." "I have lunch at home on Mondays and Wednesdays," she said with a playful grin. "Why don't you join me?" Sammy hesitated. "I wouldn't want to do anything that might seem improper." "Would your wife mind?" she asked, a teasing tone in her voice. "No wife, no girlfriend," he admitted. "Are you a gentleman?" she asked, half jokingly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, meeting her eyes. "We can eat out on the patio." "That should be all right," she said reassuringly. From then on, twice a week, Sammy joined Annette for lunch on her patio. They talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter. By the third week, Sammy realised he was utterly and hopelessly in love with her. He hadn't dated much before, and, since meeting Annette, he gave up on trying altogether. No one else compared. Despite his feelings, Sammy was careful not to let her know how deep they ran. Annette had become his closest friend, someone he cherished more than he ever thought possible. About a year into their lunches, tragedy struck. Her husband, Marshall, was killed in a traffic accident. Sammy put on his best dark suit and attended the funeral visitation at the home. Annette was surrounded by her parents and Marshall's family, but when she saw him, she smiled through her tears and introduced him to everyone. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Sammy said softly, his voice tight with emotion. Inside, he wished he could trade places with Marshall to spare her pain. The sight of her grief-stricken face broke his heart. After expressing his condolences, he left, feeling helpless and unsure of what to say. Sammy took a half-day off work to attend the funeral service in Meridian, but the burial was held in Martin, Tennessee, so he didn't attend the interment. A week later, Annette returned to Meridian. Sammy had held her mail during her absence and brought it to her doorstep when he saw her car in the driveway. "Thank you," she said with a weary smile. "Call me if you need anything," Sammy said, handing her a small card with his phone number. He didn't expect her to call, but disappointment crept in when he didn't see her for days. Weeks went by before another registered letter provided him an excuse to knock on her door again. When Annette answered, her eyes were swollen and red. "I have a registered letter for you," Sammy said gently. "I just need your signature." She signed the paper, whispered a quiet "thank you," and closed the door. After that, he didn't see her for 3 weeks. The occasional letters she left for pickup assured him that she was managing, but it didn't ease his worry. Sammy's heart ached with the desire to reach out. Every evening, he fought the urge to call or knock on her door. One day, when Sammy returned home from his shift, there was a note waiting for him. "Sam Lee," a woman named Annette, called. She asked if you could call her back. He checked the date. It was exactly 2 months since Marshall's passing. Dialing her number, he heard her voice on the other end. "Sammy, could you come over? I really need to talk." "I'll be right there," he said, not hesitating. When Annette opened the door, her eyes were red and puffy, filled with a sorrow that cut through Sammy's heart. Annette led Sammy to the family room couch, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out for his. He held her hand, sensing the weight of whatever she was about to say. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice wavering. "I'm pregnant, 2.5 months along." Sammy's eyes widened as he took in her words. After a brief pause, he asked gently, "How can I help?" Tears welled up in Annette's eyes and she shook her head. "I don't know, Sammy. I just don't know what to do." She looked down, and the tears began to fall. Instinctively, Sammy wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she sobbed quietly. Softly, he whispered, "Are you thinking about an abortion?" She nodded slowly. "There's a doctor in Biloxi who performs them. But the thought of destroying the last part of Marshall, it breaks my heart. Sammy took a deep breath. Being a single mother is hard. It's also tough on a child to grow up without a father. Annette's eyes met his, searching for an answer. So, you think I should go through with it? The abortion? I didn't say that, Sammy replied earnestly. I just know it would be difficult. But if you chose that path, I would understand. Annette's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't even have health insurance anymore. And who would want to be with a woman raising another man's child? Sammy didn't hesitate. I don't know about other men, but I know one thing. I would love anyone who came from you. Her eyes widened at his words, a spark of hope breaking through her sadness. Would you really, Sammy? Could you mean that? He nodded solemnly. I would, with all my heart. A long silence followed as they sat together, the only sound in the room her soft, uneven breaths. Finally, Annette stood, determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. I want to keep my baby. Sammy stood with her, a sense of relief washing over him. I understand, he said, ready to support her in any way he could. She turned to him, eyes still glistening. Sammy, do you love me? The question took his breath away, but there was no hesitation in his answer. With all my heart, he said, voice steady. Would you marry me? Annette asked, her tone serious yet hopeful. Sammy felt a jolt of shock, the room spinning for a moment. Are you serious? He stammered. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. If you tell your parents and Marshall's parents that you're expecting his child, I'd marry you in a heartbeat. But do you love me, Annette? She gave a soft, reassuring smile. I would grow to love you more with each passing day. I'd be a good wife, Sammy. He considered her words, and a small, hopeful voice inside him whispered that it would be enough. Then call Marshall's parents, he said. Do you mind if I call from the bedroom? She asked. Go ahead. I'll wait here, he said, settling onto the couch as a flurry of thoughts and emotions flooded his mind. Annette disappeared into the other room, and Sammy listened intently as she made the call. Hi, could you get Dad on the line too? I need to talk to both of you, she said. The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Is everything all right? Marshall's mother's concerned voice came through the receiver. When Marshall's father joined the call, Annette's voice softened. I wanted to let you know that I'm 2.5 months pregnant with Marshall's baby. There was a moment of stunned silence before Marshall's father replied, That's wonderful news. Are you going to need help? I found out today, and yes, I'll need support. But there's more I need to share, Annette said, pausing for a breath. Do you remember Sammy, the mailman who came to the visitation and funeral? I do, Marshall's mother said. He seemed like a kind, shy young man. Annette continued. He's one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. I want you to know I was always faithful to Marshall, never once strayed. But Sammy and I became close friends. He loves me and has offered to marry me and be a father to the baby. He'll never replace Marshall. But I believe I could grow to love him. And I need him. It's so soon, Marshall's mother said, her voice filled with concern. Sammy convinced me that keeping the baby was better than any alternative. And I think he's right, Annette said. We would hate for you to have an abortion, Marshall's father added softly. I don't want that either, but I need Sammy's help to get through this and to raise the child. I can't do it alone, she admitted, her voice cracking. Marshall's mother responded after a pause. We'll support you, no matter what you decide. Just tell us how we can help. I'd like you both to be there for the wedding and to be a big part of your grandson's life, Annette said, emotion thick in her voice. And Sammy? Marshall's mother asked. He insisted I call you before we talked any more about marriage, Annette said. Back in the living room, Sammy's mind raced through scenarios, half expecting her to return with news that their conversation had been a misunderstanding. When Annette finally emerged, she looked calmer, more at peace. "I spoke to them, and they understand," she said, looking at him with a glimmer of hope. "How about your parents?" Sammy felt a sense of joy swell in his chest. "They'll be thrilled to see me settle down. No problem there." A small smile played on her lips. "We're talking about getting married, and you haven't even kissed me yet." He moved closer, and their first kiss was sweet and tentative. When they pulled apart, Annette said with a slight grin, "It's time for you to know what you're getting into before it all changes." "Swollen maybe, but never ugly," Sammy whispered as she led him to the bedroom. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, searching her face for any doubt. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady. "I love you so much," he said, feeling the words resonate deep within him. "I hope so," she replied softly, "because I love you too." Sammy awoke to the warmth of the early morning sun filtering through the curtains, the dreamlike haze lingering for a moment before he realised it was real. Annette lay beside him, her body pressed gently against his side, her steady breathing a comforting reminder of the night before. He could hardly believe it. This beautiful woman was going to be his wife. The thought made his heart race, but reality nudged at him. He had to get to work. Glancing at the clock, he realised he was cutting it close. Reluctantly, Sammy eased out of bed, careful not to wake Annette. He gathered his clothes and slipped into the guest bathroom, where he showered and shaved, thankful for the spare supplies Annette had stored there. The hot water washed away the remnants of sleep, but it did nothing to quell the rush of emotion surging through him. Dressed and ready, Sammy hurried out to his pickup truck, bracing himself against the light drizzle that had turned into a full rain shower. The storm clouds matched the temperament of the sorting room supervisor, a man known for his sour disposition. Sammy parked, dodged the rain, and made it into the building just in time. "You need to be here earlier," the supervisor grumbled, his voice as unpleasant as ever. Sammy didn't argue. He was usually quiet, content to keep to himself and focus on the parts of the job he enjoyed, especially being outdoors. "I'm on time and I'll be on my route on time," he replied, surprising the supervisor, who raised an eyebrow at Sammy's assertiveness. Nothing could shake Sammy's good mood. The night before had been a turning point in his life, and he replayed the memory as he sorted the mail at a steady pace. The other carriers moved at a consistent, unhurried speed, and Sammy fell in line with the rhythm. On Saturdays, they worked faster to finish early, but today was just an ordinary day. The rain had soaked through his clothes earlier, so Sammy took a brief moment to change into a dry set from his locker. He kept spare underwear, trousers, boots and slickers for days like this. Once ready, he signed for a couple of registered letters, loaded his mail bundles into the post office jeep and set off for his route. The first stop was always a familiar one. At exactly 8 a.m, Sammy began delivering to the houses on his route, starting with 2 blocks on the east side, before crossing the street and heading back on the west side. The streets were quiet, the rain easing into a light drizzle that tapped on mailboxes and rooftops. At the 5th house, Sammy rang the bell. "Mrs. Benson, how are you this morning?" he asked warmly. The elderly widow, a staple of his morning visits, opened the door with a smile. "I'm fine, Sammy. It's a dreadful day out there." "Come in for a minute," she said, handing him a large styrofoam cup filled with steaming coffee. "Thank you," he said, giving her the mail and a small paper sack. It contained styrofoam cups and a bag of her favourite freshly ground coffee, a luxury she had once mentioned missing due to cost and convenience. Sammy had made a habit of buying it for her, and in return, she brewed them coffee each morning. "Is there anything you need?" Sammy asked, taking a sip. "No, dear, I'm just fine," Mrs. Benson replied with a grateful smile. Sammy nodded. "I better get going." He took his cup and continued to the next house, a sense of satisfaction warming him more than the coffee. The next block included another widow he checked on daily, while an elderly gentleman on his route preferred his visits later in the morning. The route felt longer than usual, anticipation bubbling inside him as he counted down to Annette's house. 20 minutes earlier than his typical arrival, Sammy parked the Jeep, hurried up the steps, and knocked. Annette opened the door, her expression clouded with worry. Before he could speak, she admitted, "When I woke up and you were gone, I was afraid." His heart tightened at her words. "Afraid of what?" he asked, fearing the answer. "Second thoughts," she whispered, searching his face for reassurance. Sammy pulled her into a gentle embrace. "No second thoughts. Last night was the best night of my life. I'm the happiest man in the world," he said. "Those are my only thoughts." A smile broke through her troubled expression. "I'm glad you're happy," she said, leading him further inside. "Let's see if I can make your lunch hour just as enjoyable." They made love in the quiet morning, the sound of rain pattering against the window as a backdrop. Sammy traced the curves of her body afterward, marvelling at her beauty. "You're perfect," he whispered, his eyes drinking in every detail. "I'm glad you think so," Annette said with a contented sigh. A shadow of doubt flickered across his face. "Does it bother you that I'm just a postman? Being a postman's wife isn't the same as being married to a doctor." She turned to face him fully. "Do you like being a postman?" she asked. He smiled, thinking of the simple joys it brought. "I do. I don't think there's anything I'd enjoy more. After all, it brought me to you." Annette cupped his face in her hands. "Then that's all that matters. If you're happy, I'm happy." Sammy glanced at the clock and turned to Annette, a playful smile on his lips. "We've got time for a quickie before I have to go." With a smile that mirrored his, Annette welcomed him as he moved over her. As they shared an intimate moment, her thoughts drifted. Sammy's energy and enthusiasm were undeniable. "He's going to make me sore," she mused, but there was something refreshing in how he loved her. He wasn't Marshall, and while she didn't yet love Sammy, she knew she would grow to. His touch, his joy, and his unwavering positivity lifted her out of the darkness she had felt since Marshall's death. It was comforting, even exhilarating, to be around someone who was so full of life. 2 weeks later, Sammy and Annette exchanged vows in a quiet ceremony at her home. The guest list was small and intimate. Sammy, Annette, his parents, her parents, Marshall's parents. Marshall's father, a respected federal judge, officiated the ceremony. Sammy had worried about how Marshall's parents would receive him. When he first met them, their demeanour had been formal, even cold, as if they were reserving judgment. But Sammy resolved that he could handle their reserve as long as Annette was happy. Under Mississippi law, the baby would be recognised as his, so there was no need for adoption paperwork. Marshall's parents seemed to appreciate being included in the event, which brought them closer to the new chapter unfolding before them. When it came to wedding gifts, Sammy had been straightforward about his wishes. His parents provided the wedding meal, Annette's parents gifted nursery items they had lovingly saved from her childhood, and Marshall's parents presented a deeply personal collage of photos, a portrait, and a scrapbook chronicling Marshall's life. Sammy chose to hang the pictures in the nursery, a way to honour Marshall's memory and share it with the baby. The reception was held in Annette's home, with Sammy's mother preparing Marshall's favourite meal: country fried steak, mashed potatoes with gravy, lady peas, fresh tomatoes, garden salad, and fluffy biscuits. It was simple, hearty fare, served in a warm and familiar setting. Before dessert was served, the guests were invited to see the nursery for the first time. Marshall's parents wept when they saw the collage of photos displayed on the wall, a tribute that softened their initial apprehension. Sammy felt their acceptance for the first time, a silent nod to the bond that was forming between them all. Dessert followed, a rich cherry cobbler with scoops of ice cream, and the atmosphere grew light and friendly. The judge stood and cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "My wife and I were devastated when we lost our son," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I have to admit, I struggled with the idea of Annette remarrying so soon. But I see now that I was wrong. My grandchild is in good hands." He paused, glancing around the room before continuing. We've decided to create a trust for our grandchild and amend it so that Sammy and Annette will be the trustees. Additionally, we are including the Bay House in Fairhope in the trust. We hope you'll use it for your honeymoon and beyond. Thank you for welcoming us into this new chapter of your family. We are honoured to be a part of it. Annette's eyes shimmered with gratitude as she embraced him. Thank you, Dad. Their honeymoon began with a night in the honeymoon suite at the Four Seasons in New Orleans, where they dined at the court of two sisters. The next day they set off for Fairhope, a place that suited them more with its relaxed charm. Sammy was in pure bliss. He couldn't get enough of Annette, who, by the end of their first week, was just as enamoured with him. Annette took pleasure in cooking Sammy's favourite dishes, and they spent long, lazy afternoons watching the bay and the sunsets. To Sammy, it was the perfect honeymoon. Little Marshall's christening was a heartwarming event. Marshall's parents stood proudly as godparents and were named guardians should anything happen to Sammy and Annette. To mark the occasion, they gifted Sammy and Annette a new car, a gesture for their grandson's future. 2 years later, they stood again as godparents to Sammy and Annette's daughter, cementing their role as grandparents to all the children that followed. The judge retired to senior status and moved with his wife to a peaceful farm outside Jackson, Mississippi. The grandchildren became frequent visitors, filling the house with laughter. To encourage Sammy and Annette to take time for themselves, the judge and his wife often gifted them trips to Europe and cruises, delighted at any excuse to have the grandchildren visit. While Sammy and Annette enjoyed these trips, their hearts always longed for Fairhope. Years passed and the family grew. 4 children filled their home with joy, and Sammy's love for Annette never waned. Their children were close-knit, sharing a bond that mirrored their parents' love. Sammy continued his job as a letter carrier, relishing the connections he had with the people on his route. He was part of their lives, just as he was part of Annette's. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the Bay House, watching their children play by the water, Sammy took Annette's hand in his. He looked out at the shimmering sunset and the sounds of their laughter and said, "It doesn't get any better than this." Annette squeezed his hand, a smile spreading across her face. "No, it doesn't," she said, feeling the contentment settle deep within her heart. "Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our next one. Have a wonderful day.